Media.com for more great podcasts.
Welcome to Dig on America, where we speak truth to power. Every week, we give you the dig on how American history, policies, and media created the social and political issues we face today. DOA is independent media supported by listeners, but they'll tell you we're just fake news, deep state propaganda, funded by George Soros, the Clinton Foundation, BLM Marxists, and
Howard the Duck, I think, probably sponsoring today's show. Hey, welcome everybody. This is Jason Dutch with Dig on America. Another in the brief history of the live stream, the Lunch Break Livestream, as I'm literally on lunch. And today I'm actually joined by a guest. A guest I don't know much about, to be honest with you, but he challenged me to Mortal Kombat. So we're going to fight to the death. No, I met this gentleman on Twitter. We had a couple conversations. He is a fact checker, and his name is Justin Campbell. So Justin, go ahead and introduce yourself very briefly to the folks.
Yeah, so I do a small podcast called Fact Check This Podcast. I kind of got fed up with the fact checkers always popping up on everything and started looking more into what the fact checkers had to say in their articles, and decided to start pointing out the hypocrisy of the way the fact checkers portray what they're trying to say. So I'm kind of a libertarian leaning, more of an anarchist type than anything. Live on a nice little piece of property out in the middle of nowhere in Indiana, and have goats and chickens and a garden, and just trying to drop off the grid. But I enjoy talking about politics and religion and even sports and some other stuff every once in a while when the mood strikes me. So,
okay, well, I appreciate that little recap there. So, one of the things that I think one of the videos that you had looked at was when I had talked on the last lunch break live stream, where I was talking about the woke church, and so I think we'll at least we've got about a hard, let's see, what do we have here? We have a hard about 35 minutes, I think, because Justin's got to get out the door here. So we're just gonna have a brief little conversation, talk about a couple things. So when it comes to the church, so first of all, are you a churchgoer?
yes.
Okay. Do you identify with a particular denomination or anything?
The most recent church that my family and I have gone to is non-denominational. I was raised Methodist through most of my later high school and college days. I was Baptist, and then I also went to Presbyterian church for a while immediately after college, and then, like I said, here over the last several years, we've gone to a non-denominational church. My wife was raised Pentecostal, and my mom was raised Catholic. So I've had a healthy mix of all of the different Christian denominations.
Okay, so you and me both. I was raised Methodist, or was it Lutheran? I forget. I think actually both. I think we went to a Methodist church and a Lutheran church for a little bit. Lutheran more, which they're kind of similar. And honestly, I can't tell you any difference between the two as far as what I recollect.
They have a lot of similarities. So.
Yeah, I think Lutheran's probably a little closer to Catholic. Methodist obviously is very methodical, hence the name of Methodist. Most recently, I've started going to a Pentecostal church, which is real strange to me. I've been to Pentecostal churches before, specifically Black Pentecostal churches, which, but this is a more white Pentecostal church. In Bakersfield, there's a few Black people that go there, but it's by and large white Hispanic. And a lot of shouting, a lot of clapping, a lot more music and stuff like that. But also the one of the things that they talk about a lot is like, like that video you were talking about the other day that I did regarding the woke church. And what I think this is kind of relevant because what we've had a lot in the news is we've had a lot about the Florida, it was known as the Don't Say Gay law. I don't know if you've seen that law or if you have any familiarity with that. But it's, to me, it seems to be that there is this renewed interest in anyone who supports the gay community as being woke or as being against the church in some particular way. So I don't want to presume what you know or what you believe. I'm sorry. So I'll ask you, what is your particular belief when it comes to the topics of, does supporting the gay community make you like what they would call these woke churches these days, or is it something that you can kind of tie the two together and support the gay community and be a good quote unquote Christian?
So I guess, and this might be more of a, for me personally, type of thing, because I do tend to lean a little more libertarian in my beliefs and political philosophies and stuff. And it's a lot more of a live and let live type of a mindset with stuff. Like, if you're not hurting
libertarian, people, libertarian is a wide spectrum, though.
It is, yes, the libertarian umbrella definitely covers a lot of ground. But by and large, it is much more of a kind of a live and let live type of philosophy. And for me personally, I don't have any problem with the gay community. I don't have any problem with supporting gay people or the gay community. Like, for instance, the church that we attended, while they have a what would be considered a very like traditional theological type of position on is homosexuality a sin, they also don't exclude gay people. We had plenty of people who went to the church. They were, they sang in the on worship teams. They were participants in the church. They understood the lead pastor and the rest of the pastoral staff's theological perspective on it, but it didn't change the fact that they came and they worshiped, and they were, as far as I would consider them, they were very good Christians, better Christians than some people that I've gone to church with in other, more traditional denominational churches. So,
right,
like, there is I think the thing that gets lost in some of these extremely, I don't want to say extremely traditional, because tradition is very important, but for some of the way the more aggressive churches approach homosexuality is they tend to remove the person entirely because of the sin, as opposed to treating everybody like a human being. And that's not what the Bible preaches. And I don't know. To the topic of the woke church in particular, what I had seen with that was less of a specifically about gay stuff and more just a general pandering to what are considered social norms and a departure from traditional theology. If that makes sense. Like, instead of preaching the Bible and what the Bible actually says, they create something that checks all the right boxes for what is considered socially acceptable to be popular and to get people to come in the doors. I don't think it's as much. I don't think the woke church idea is as much a single issue thing as a general departure from scriptural leading and teaching.
Okay, so it's a lot to chew on with that. So I think there's a couple dynamics here. I think number one, I think the church has tied itself far too much to the Republican Party.
The
Especially
church has tied itself far too much to politics in general, like that, and that's that's since the
since Newt Gingrich, created wedge issues. Well, he didn't create them, but he pushed them to the center, and made abortion really a religious issue, where previous to that, it may have been something that religious people didn't love, but they didn't look at it, I don't think, with such a political lens, right? Like, I think it was probably the 80s when all of a sudden Democrats were guilty of killing babies for the last 2 centuries. Before that, we as Democrats had been exonerated from said crimes, right? So, it's the hey, what's up in the chat? With the gay thing, it's obvious. Like, you can't get around the fact that it says in the Bible that homosexuality is not something that God likes. Right now, there is some nuance to a couple of the verses that are cited. I've heard some very interesting takes on when a man lays with a man as he would a woman, as in that not necessarily saying what we might translate it to be in English when you look at the original Hebrew and stuff like that. But I don't speak Hebrew or Greek, so I kind of go on what the English versions are. And last I checked, the Bible is infallible in any interpretation. So therefore, an interpretation there, which obviously is ridiculous to say, because if I translate the Bible and omit Ephesians 2, it's no longer the same Bible, right? And then we have different Bibles. We have the Deuterocanonical texts that are within the Catholic Church. We have where they have 6 additional books that aren't in the what you would call the Protestant or protested church. But when it comes to the gay thing, like, and the abortion thing, I think that there's a lot of miscited scripture that supports that is used to support this. There is a verse, I forget what it is, in Psalms where David talks about, you knew me in the womb, and that is used pretty much as a period point blank for, well, therefore abortion, God doesn't like abortion. And then they say abortion is not mentioned in the Bible, but yet it is in a way, because and in a way closer way than the David verse, because David is actually complaining in that psalm about people who are attacking him, right? So there's people who are saying bad shit about David. David's like, hey, God, you know my heart, right? You know that these people are wrong and I'm right. If you read the entire psalm in context, rather than cherry pick that one verse out. But there is I forget if it's Leviticus or if it's in Deuteronomy. I want to say it's Leviticus, where they talk about if a woman, if a man suspects a woman of infidelity, that the priest gives her basically a mix of dirt from the floor of the temple and gives it to her, and if the baby dies, then she cheated on her husband, and if the baby lives, then she didn't cheat. So it's literally aborting a fetus that would have been conceived out of wedlock. Like, do you see any other read on that other than that?
No, yeah, it's hard to parse that away from being like a plan B type thing.
Yeah, it's a very much a plan B, but God is, it's God, not a pill, right? So maybe if it was ivermectin, the right would, jump all over it. But by the way, new study turns out ivermectin not effective versus COVID.
There are like, I think there are like 5 different ones, and depending on which one you look at and at what point they administer it, it is or it isn't. It's the
well,
I wish
I'm a fan of peer research, right? So if the way I look at that, and I don't want to get in the rabbit hole. If it's effective, great. I don't care. That's fine. The problem is that these people were saying was effective before any studies, right? So whether or not they turn out to be correct or not is almost irrelevant, because the next thing that they bring up is going to be like, what, we should go through chemotherapy for, or, to cure a broken bone. I don't know what it's going to be. It's just absurd. But but as far as the church goes, with the gay thing, obviously you do have probably a handful of verses where it says things like, it is an abomination, etc. But, and you can even get away with, hey, the Bible says that homosexuality is a sin. It doesn't necessarily call being gay a sin. It calls the act of sex a sin, because the Bible just doesn't like sex in general. And Paul even doesn't like sex between a husband and wife. He says clearly it is better to not than, if you can resist the urges like I can, it is better not to have sex, right? So it's a sex control book in and of itself. But and I want your thoughts on this. There is there's a lot of other things within Leviticus and later on in the Bible that are mentioned in the same verse, in the same chapter, like shellfish, like praying outside of the temple, like making an oath, that are also abominations to God, yet not brought up ever. Like they focus so hard on homosexuality, but when's the last time they focused on lying? You know what I mean? Or pride, there, or conceit, or, Trump was very boastful. How many verses are in the Bible about boasting? But never will you hear that. Like, you might hear it once a year, but gay is like a weekly recurring message. Your thoughts?
So to go to the Leviticus versus the rest of the Bible. So the important thing to kind of separate there is Leviticus is a part of the traditional Jewish like handbook, so to speak. Like that's the Jewish rules and stuff like that. The no shellfish, all of that. So then when you get to the New Testament, so like that part of the Old Testament is dealing with Jewish tradition and culture, whereas the New Testament is focusing on what is moving past the Jewish traditions into Christianity. So that's why there is kind of a separation, and it's Jesus created the new covenant, and so at that point, Christianity got away from, but it's a new covenant with God through Jesus. So that's why the shellfish and some of the other stuff that was a part of the Jewish traditions doesn't carry over to the Christian traditions, because the Jewish traditions are still based on God's chosen people waiting for their Messiah, whereas Christianity, Christ was the Messiah. So now we have the new covenant that we've moved into with Christianity. So that's why those two kind of delineate from each other.
Which verse do you put more credence into? And I'm not holding a Bible, but Christ says, "I have not come to change the law; I have come to fulfill the law." And then Hebrews 8 says, "The old law is dead and should be cast away." Which of those is accurate?
That's I'd have to look at that a little bit more and think a little bit more on that specifically.
I appreciate an honest answer. I don't. That's
one of those that I don't know. I would need to look at both of. I would need to look at both of those in the context of the entirety of what's being said.
Right. Yeah,
and
that's what you should do.
throughout that. That's something I'll have to look at. That is an interesting thing, and that is something that is an easy way to get tripped up on scripture. Is especially the way. So this is something that I have a massive beef with the non-woke modern Christian church, is that they do tend to cherry pick scripture and not provide the context of what came before, what came after, how it fits into the society of the time, the conversation that was being had, the setting under which the conversation was being had. That's a big beef that I have with the non-woke Christian church of modern times, and also with the more what you would think of as the woke, extremely progressive, like societal pandering modern Christian churches, that they both
like
are
universal Unitarianism and stuff like that.
Right. They're both terrible about cherry picking certain scripture and not giving any context or putting it into the proper historical context of the conversation that was being had. So I would need to look more at those verses and kind of do a little side by side of where they are and what the larger conversation is that was being had in those. It's like I'm familiar with both of them, but it's placing it in the full context is tough on the fly. So I need to do some research on that and think a little bit more about it.
I'm not trying to trap you, brother. Just trying to right. So like and it's a little unfair. I'll be honest, because like I deliberate on things like this, right? Like, so I've brought this question. This is not. It's sort of like you're arguing with an atheist, and atheists. I'm not trying to rag on atheists here, but like one of my co-hosts is an atheist, and like they have this conversation all day, every day, right? So like when you don't have the conversation all day, every day, they're more prepared for like throwing the next question at you and breaking down your premise. Where like I don't care that much about the atheist conversation. Whether or not there is a God or not, I have no control over, and neither does the atheist. So, we're both sharing opinion. Now, usually they're arguing with someone who says, well, the Bible is infallible. That bullet doesn't work on me because I know it's not. Like I think it's an absurd thought that the Bible is infallible. But the, prayer can move mountains. Okay. All of Christianity together, you're going to tell me that they can't muster the faith the size of a mustard seed and move a mountain? Well, if ever all Christians unite on that, I mean, all these anointed people who are praying and people are curing cancer, but they can't get enough faith to move a mountain, or is it just hyperbole? Who knows, right? So if it's a metaphor, yeah, that's great. But but specifically on the gay thing, or the LGBT thing, I should say, is like I think that it becomes like very interesting when you get like into a small group within church where you're able to talk to like a men's group or a couples group or something like that, because the way that I look at that conversation is the church should take people as they are, and if God is truly anti-homosexual lifestyle, if that's the case, let God do that. Your thoughts?
Yeah, that's between. That's kind of my opinion of it as well. Like that's between God and the person on their day of judgment. Like we are not, and the Bible even says like it's not our job to judge. You can point out flaws, you can have conversations with people, but at the end of the day, like it's not our position to cast judgment. That comes. Everybody will have their day of reckoning and their time, and they go before the Lord, and you get to. I've got stuff that I get to have a reckoning with, just like a gay person will. It's not our position. And like I said, that was at the beginning, like that's something that I do take issue with a lot of the more traditional church or however you want to look at it, is
Mm-hmm.
You have to accept the human being as a child of God, whether you think they're in the right or not, whether you think they're making the right life choices. Like, you still love them, you still accept them, and when it comes time, then they will they will have their judgment with the Lord, and that's for them to reckon with, and not
Mm-hmm.
you. So yeah,
Right.
that is something that I definitely take a lot of issue with. Like I said, I believe it's a sin. I don't think like there are multiple scriptures even outside of Leviticus, and like it's even throughout the New Testament that it is frowned upon by God. But
Well, by Paul at
just
least.
because, right?
Yeah.
But even with that being the case, it's like that's not my position, or that's not my job to cast judgment on this person. My job is to show them love as a brother or sister in Christ, and help them move forward with their faith and their spirituality, one way or the
Mm-hmm.
other.
Let me ask you this. The conversation generally with when it comes to churches these days, and like, it seems to me like but I know you have a hard stop, so just give me a 5-minute warning when you get to that point, if you would, and I'll probably keep going for a minute after you log off. But like, it seems to me that you've got, and Flo has a good point there. He says if you um if you equate prayer with meditation, I'm sorry, with mediation, I misread that, or intention of belief, or any other sort of new age concept, and look at studies on how belief and attitude affect cancer recovery, for example, you can see how. So, that's a fair point. I don't necessarily, know if you can scientifically reconcile that, but if prayer works that well, then pray for a veteran to have his arm, regrown, and then I'll believe that it works in me, works to the way that they say. They always pray for stuff that you can't see, like cancer and COVID and stuff like that, but never for like, oh, I'm fat and ugly, can you pray that I will look like Channing Tatum in the morning? That would be fucking great. But anyway, it seems that there's this prophetic movement going on within the church right now, and a lot of that is very anti this woke, the woke culture, if you want to use that term, where it's like they want to return America to becoming a Christian nation. The so it's like the church feels it's under attack. It's under attack by Democrats. It's under attack by school boards. It's under attack by critical race theory. It's under attack by LGBT issues. It's under attack. The Second Amendment doesn't really come into play there, but that's a different under attack. But because the church has sort of toes the line on guns. But the thing that I find interesting, and I'd like your opinion on, is that when you have when you have this preaching from the pulpit against, like, basically democratic agenda as being proxy for Satan, how does that message fall upon you as a churchgoer?
I don't I don't like that. I try to approach religion from a divorced from politics perspective. So when it does become a major talking point where politics is getting blended into the sermon, it's getting blended into the dialogue, it's getting blended into the way that they interpret the scripture, that rubs me the wrong way, and like that's a quick way to push me away from a specific church, or away from a specific pastor, or leadership team, or what have you. Um, the early church, in its origins of Christianity, was sort of not sort of, it was a counterculture type of a movement. It was not supposed to be this mixed into all things politics like it's become. And so, like, anytime either the traditional or the woke churches use that as this massive sticking point, that is removing the intention and the purpose of Christianity and the faith and the mission of the church from what it's supposed to be. Like, that's going away from God and away from Jesus and pointing towards social things. That's pointing towards what makes the individuals feel accomplished and feel like they're doing something. That it takes away from the message of God and of Jesus and of what the church is supposed to be about. So I feel like that's kind of a cop-out answer, but like that's anytime, it doesn't matter if it's from the left or from the right. If I hear that coming from a church, then that church is not serving its purpose to promote spirituality, promote spiritual growth and development, and promote God and the mission of Christianity and the church. So that's where I fall on that. If it's being overly politicized one way or the other, then it's completely missing the mark, and there needs to be a reckoning within that church on that. Like that's a failure of leadership to serve their community properly, in my opinion.
Is the church that you go to guilty of that at all?
Pre-COVID, no. Since COVID, it's shifted.
COVID's changed a lot.
Yeah. It's
now masks are anti-God somehow.
See, the church that I go to went a little more in the other direction. They went a lot more with the promoting the vaccine and wearing your mask and distancing and stuff like that. And like
in the beginning,
even to some extent now, and like that's
truly astonishing.
And as soon as it became something that the church leadership was talking about, we started looking for some other place, because like that, if we don't need to get into my politics or my beliefs on it one way or the other. I don't want that from my church. Like, that's not what we're here for. And I've led a men's group, and we did like online church where like you would attend services online, and you had kind of a virtual community, and we would get together with our local church family, the people who live near us and stuff, and do stuff. And none of that, like in those small groups, we were able to stay away from that stuff and focus on our spiritual growth and development together, in the church. But then when you're like actually get back to church and leadership is talking about that kind of stuff, it pushes me away. And honestly, if they had gone in the other direction, it still would have pushed me away, because that's not what we are here for. That's not the purpose of the church. And I think, so I think the Orthodox Church, I don't know if you've looked into it, the Eastern Orthodox or Russian Orthodox. I think they have done it well. Not so. Some people would probably consider the Orthodox Church anti-science or anti-vax or anti-whatever, but they're really not any of that. They remain solely focused on God and Christ and the mission of the church, and they didn't get into any of that stuff. So that's what I want to see from my church, is to be a house of God, not a house of politics.
Yeah, and I think you'll agree that it's almost impossible to get away from that now. It's you have some churches that you might call left churches, where they're.
I gotta go to about 5.
Okay, perfect. I appreciate that. You have a lot of churches that are maybe on the left, that more left leaning at least. That promote politics, and then you have the other, the more, I think the far greater number are conservative leaning churches. And one thing I want, and after you go, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Florida bill, but I am curious to get your thought on one other thing. What is your thought on the church? And this is not, all churches are certainly not guilty of this next statement, but specifically, the Kenneth Copeland groups and, a lot of the Sid Roth groups and stuff like this, with this prophetic, a civil war is coming. A lot of them propagate that Trump is sort of like Cyrus 2.0, and he's going to be reinstalled as president, or that he is like this unwilling vessel who is preparing the world for, this revival. Some will say Armageddon, but others will say for a revival to Christianity for this nation. Do you have any thoughts on that whole prophetic? It's sort of almost a prophetic version of QAnon, but I'll stop short of calling it QAnon by an inch. That's been going on right now, or have you maybe not seen it?
I haven't followed it closely. I've seen it. I consider that to be deeply anti-Christian. Like the Bible itself says, we don't know, and only God knows. And when churches start delving into that type of thing, I think that is the religious version of clickbait. Like it's to it captures the attention of like the lowest interest level, like the people who are just in it for this aha moment. And it doesn't promote spiritual growth. It doesn't promote learning about God. It doesn't promote community and all of the things that Christianity is supposed to be built around. So whenever I see that kind of stuff, I roll my eyes and I kind of move away from it, because that is not what Christianity is supposed to be about. So they are those groups and those churches, they do a disservice to other Christians, like the Westboro Baptists. Like it's a different version of, they do a disservice to the faith by bastardizing what the message is supposed to be, or by not even looking at the message of Christ, but turning it into some it's almost like I don't want to say like a social justice warrior type movement, but it would be like the polar opposite of that in the church. It is a perversion of the faith.
Yeah, one of the churches I started going to recently, the church I started going to recently, I thought it was funny. They handed out a constitution because it was our first time there. So like their welcome packet has a written version of the Constitution, right? And I'm like, first of all, what the hell does this have to do with church? But then they proceeded to trample all over the Constitution from the pulpit. And I'm like, but the hard part is like my wife, she doesn't care, right? Like if the church says it's got to be true, right? Because there's just some Christians who just won't push back on anything. They're like, well, if the pastor's saying it, there must be some truth to it. And you saying the opposite, you must be the devil must be talking to you, or you're watching CNN too much, or whatever the case may be. But all right, well, I'm going to stay on for a minute and talk about a couple other things. Justin, I know you guys to roll. Take 30 seconds and let the people know where they might be able to find you or your show.
Yep, you can find me my Twitter handle at jcamp1521. My show is the Fact Check This podcast. It's on everywhere. It's on all the podcatchers: YouTube, Odyssey, Rumble, Locals, BitChute. I've got a link tree on my bio and on Twitter, so check it out and follow me. I do a couple other things as well. I do a lot of video and audio work for a number of different libertarian podcasts and stuff like that. So you can check out all my work over on Twitter. Thanks for having me on. This was really a great conversation. I really
Yeah.
enjoy this kind of stuff.
No worries. We'll talk again. We can, come over there. You can come over here, whatever you want to do.
Definitely.
So,
Thanks for
all right,
having
my
me.
man. Take care.
See ya.
All right, guys. So thank you to Justin for stopping by for a few. I just want to take a couple seconds and talk about this Florida bill, and really not so much the bill, because the bill, I mean, if you read the bill and you can't see that it's discriminatory, I really am not. Yeah, I mean, you're just not reading the bill. I've had this conversation on Twitter with some very outspoken right wing folks, and they can't seem to overcome uh, the argument that I'm putting forward. They're saying that, just in a nutshell, that that the bill, we don't want any sex education talk with K through 3. Okay, I agree with that. Where does it say that in the bill? It doesn't mention sex education. It doesn't mention the word sex. The only thing it mentions is sexual identity, and gender identity. So I'm sorry, sexual orientation and gender identity. So it's just acknowledging that someone has a gender identity has absolutely nothing to do with sex. That person could be uh, a virgin until they're 40. It's got nothing to do with sex. It has to do with the idea of it, and that's where the impasse comes. But so when it comes to things like, and I've heard a lot of stuff in the last few days, like, gay pride is, it's sort of like anti-gay pride month, and, anti-LGBT studies. And, they always go, it seems like they always go to the extreme where it's like, well, they're teaching our kids to have sex changes at 6, and, they're encouraging cross-dressing and all this types of stuff. They're having drag queens come in and read Dr. Seuss to the kids and that sort of stuff. And so I just kind of want to give my 2 cents on this, and you can feel free to agree or disagree. I don't care. But we have Gay Pride Month, and for those of you who may listen to the show and may not, or watch this video and may have an issue with things like Gay Pride Month, or gay people in general being proud of their homosexuality, I would challenge you to think about the fact that that is a relatively new freedom that they are now feeling they are able to show off, so to speak, because of the fact that they were not really able to show that off for quite some time. Um, Being a homosexual was something. There's the term "the closet" for a reason. People stayed in the closet for a reason. If there was no social consequence, there would be no reason for a closet to have existed ever. So people were disfellowshipped from their churches. They were dismissed from their families. They were, either let go from their job or treated poorly by their employer. Just people on the streets who, may choose to dress a little bit more flamboyantly, whether they were gay or not, were often discriminated against because of that fear of LGBT. And I would just challenge you to say, hey, to think about it. Hey, you know what? This country is trying to turn into a place where your sexual orientation is no longer something that you need to keep hidden in that closet. And because of that, you have terms like gay pride. And, they are proud now, not to say that they weren't before, but they are able to be publicly proud now because we have had court rulings that have backed up the penalty for people who discriminate against them once they choose to come out, right? So there's less fear to be able to come out and to be proud of whom they are, rather than having to keep that, below the surface, and maybe only, go on to a couple of gay dating sites and, stuff like that, and kind of keep it fly under the radar, so to speak. And I think it's important to, to think about that, like, seeing gay people on MTV or, or in a commercial or in a Marvel movie or whatever the case may be, seeing two people kiss shouldn't trigger us. If two women or two men kiss, it shouldn't trigger you, right? Like, now, I personally am not a big fan of like gratuitous kissing in movies in general. I don't watch romantic comedies because of that reason. I like action sci-fi. If a kiss scene, a quick sex scene is fine. But like, I don't want it overblown in any capacity, because then it starts to take away from the actual movie. And if I want to watch sex scene, I'll turn on fucking RedTube. So, but it shouldn't trigger us, because like, people will say, well, they're trying to indoctrinate our youth. And I don't agree with that at all, because people who right now today are gay, especially those who are over, say, 20, grew up in a world where they did not see much, if any, gay kissing on television. They grew up watching heterosexual people kiss on TV, and watching those heterosexual people kiss did not make them think that they too should be attracted to the other sex, if they were in fact not. They still ended up being gay, despite watching a vast majority of the romance on television be heterosexual. So the idea that me watching, or my kid watching, Star Wars, for example, episode 9, at the end of it, where the two ladies kiss for like a half second, and that's going to cause my son to experiment with homosexuality, is really stupid. So, and you had people boycotting a 2.5-hour movie because of a 1 second kiss scene between two women. No tongue, no spooning, just a kiss. And people boycotted the movie. They boycotted Eternals because two men kissed for 1.5 seconds. And you're seeing more positive portrayals of people as human beings, rather than as gay people who happen to, gay first. So like, they in the 80s, when you first started seeing some gay characters on TV, that gayness was exuberated, right? Like, they were the fancy one, or the flamboyant character, or just super outwardly, stereotypically LGBT, where now you just have a regular guy who you've watched the whole movie, and then you find out at the end of the movie, after he's saved the day or she's saved the day, that they happen to be attracted to the other sex. Who fucking cares? And then people are going to get triggered and then say, oh, I'm going to boycott this movie because I enjoyed it until the last 3 seconds when such and such kiss such and such. That is why you have things like gay pride, because we need to understand that. And I see a lot of comments going up, but I as I'm talking, I'm not reading them, so I apologize. But like, we need to understand that for so long they have been shelved and told to shut up, or felt like they needed to be quiet, even though maybe society wasn't yelling shut up at them. They saw the consequences that happened to other people, and therefore they were quiet about it. And now they're like, hey, you know what? Maybe I don't have to be quiet about who I am anymore. And we who are heterosexual don't think about that, because we've never been in a situation where we've had to shut up about it. It's always been a social norm. So now, just because you're having new social norms doesn't mean that America is under attack by leftist criminals. You know, if my neighbor is screwing a woman or screwing a guy, has no bearing on my life at all. None. So, you know, if they come over for a barbecue, they should be able to be themselves. And if you're triggered by them kissing, then you have a problem, not them. You know? So I'd like us to work on not being overtly triggered by stuff like that. A comment in there about the agenda, and that's the thing. You are falling into a trap where you think there is an agenda. The agenda is not to inundate people with a gay agenda. The agenda is, if there even is, if you even want to call it an agenda, the agenda is to end the agenda that was silencing it or pushing it into the shadows of society, where they would say, well, you know, you can be gay, but just, you know, don't be gay in front of me. You know, don't be gay at work. Don't talk about your gayness at the Thanksgiving dinner table. That was indeed the agenda. The agenda was to make it seem as if that did not exist, where now it's more openly accepted. You know, having transgendered people read to kids in schools does one thing and one thing only. It allows children to view transgendered people, or in the case of some of them, there was drag queens, which is not transgender, completely different thing. But to look at them as humans and say, hey, there's nothing abnormal about this. This is just a person who's here and they're reading a book to me. There's nothing sinister about green eggs and ham. So unless Ted Cruz is reading it on the Senate floor as part of a filibuster, which we'll hear about, by the way, tomorrow on Dig on America, as that is my topic. But we just want people to be treated as people. And that's it. Not treated as gay people or black people or green people, but as people. And if you truly believe that all lives matter, then that should be perfectly fine with you. You know, but what I see is that it's not, because, you know, people, and I'm not trying to shine a spotlight on anybody, but, you know, I hear all the time that like there's this overt agenda by, you know, the mainstream media, and by things like Disney and stuff like that. You know, Disney is opposing this Florida law for a really personal reason, and I'm going to tell you why that is. Okay. For context, my wife used to be a Disney worker. Okay. She was in the parks. She worked at Disneyland in the 90s and the early 2000s. And you know how they have like Mickey walk around and they have Cinderella walk around the park and take pictures with kids? My wife was Pocahontas when the movie came out. And for a few years after the movie came out, she was Pocahontas. So she was in the brown, had the long hair, you know, and she'd walk around and take pictures with kids. And she did the boat thing, where I forget the name, where the boat, you know, it's the show. I forget what it's called. So she worked there. And while she was there, she had a number of John Smiths. So John Smith is the Prince Charming for Pocahontas, for those who don't know, at least in the Disney story, not true in real life. But so all of the John Smiths that she worked with, she said she probably had 5 John Smiths, and 4 of them were gay. And she mentioned to me that there was an overwhelming amount of character actors at Disney, specifically the male character actors, who were gay. And that doesn't just include like the Prince Charmings and the John Smiths. That's also including like the guy in the Goofy costume and the Buzz Lightyear costume and all of those. I don't know the reason why that was. Maybe it was because they couldn't get jobs elsewhere. I don't know, but Disney has a super high percentage of alumni who are gay because of that. Like maybe they were people who couldn't get a job as an actual actor, so they went to work at Disney and were a character actor instead, right? That's probably just one of 1,000 reasons. So there's a strong, the gay community has a very strong voice within Disney that is not present in other companies. So what you have to wonder is, would it be right or wrong? Is it incumbent upon Disney to look out for their employees and their alumni? And I would answer that question as yes. That would be the socially responsible thing for them to do. If they did anything else, they'd be basically saying, look, these people who sacrificed for us and toiled out there in the 100-degree weather, singing, so that we underpaid in most of those cases as well, that we don't give a shit about them anymore. It's refreshing to see a business say, hey, well, you know what? We do give a shit about you for once. And that's not to say Disney's doesn't have issues. Like the way that dads are portrayed on the Disney Channel shows, I find it stupid, right? Like the mom's always super cutesy, super fun, super hip, and the dad's this bumbling dope on like all of the Disney Channel teen shows, like That's So Raven and Hannah Montana, and maybe not Hannah Montana, but because I have kids, I watch these shows. So, but you get the idea. The dad's sort of goofy, right? He's a good dad, but he's a goofy dude. And like, okay, I mean, maybe it's somewhat accurate because I'm kind of goofy, but but I think that there's a wider spectrum of who dads are, right? So, so I'm not saying Disney is perfect, right? Like they're a company and they underpay their people. They don't provide as good of insurance as they should. There's a lot of issues with Disney. This particular one isn't one. And for people to be saying, oh, I'm going to cancel my Netflix or my Disney Plus account because the owner had the audacity to oppose Ron DeSantis's bill, not his bill, but the bill he's going to sign, is pretty stupid. And if you want to find out who has, and for those of you who love capitalism, you want to find out who has more power in Florida, Ron DeSantis or Disney, you're going to have a very, very interesting wake up, because since you have enabled capitalists so much, you will find that they are far more important to the economy and the economic infrastructure within Florida. They have a lot more influence on that, not only because of Disney World, not only because of the Buena Vista resorts, not only because of Epcot and the movie studios that they have down there, but also all of the ancillary businesses, the food businesses, the uniform businesses, everything that supports the Walt Disney World and their Hollywood, not Hollywood, obviously, but their cinematic presences down there. The transportation community. Disney supports a ton of that economic infrastructure within the greater Orlando and really Central Florida area. So if they were to just say, okay, screw you, we're gonna pull up and we'll build a brand new Disney World. I'm not saying they're going to do that, but if they did, the Ron DeSantis would have to answer for that, right? Because the economy of Florida would tank. And he gets to own that. So do I think in general businesses should be lobbying for laws? No, of course I don't, because I've said that 1,000 times, that usually they're pandering for laws on the wrong side. But then the one time, and nobody says a word, but then when they pander for a law on the other side, One American News Network loses its collective mind.